We talked, if I could have summarized everything this morning, I could have done it in one sentence. God gets there first. If that's all that I had, that's enough. God gets there first. I'm not saying that I have figured out exactly how to cash in on that, because every situation is different, every home is different, every town is different, but He's always there. And when we lose sight of that, when we start to think that it's actually our job to make people interested, rather than looking for those that are being made interested by God, it's where we start to make mistakes. And we've made some big ones, Christians. New York Times, October 7, 2007. The headline got my attention. It was great. New York Times, the headline, "Thou shalt not kill, except in a popular video game at church." I'm thinking, I got to read that story. First, the percussive sounds of sniper fire, then the thrill of the kill, then the gospel of peace. Oh, you need my password? It's really 3 angels. You can break into every Adventist computer in church on earth. It's either 3 angels. The security code to your church is 1844 or 316 or 416, or it's 666. Yeah, there's some that do that. Or 2300. Usually within 10 tries, I'm into your church. You want to break into my computer, it's 3 angels. My phone number, the last 4 digits are 1844. Figured that out. I was so pleased with that. When they showed me that number, I said, yeah, that's mine. Give it to me. Across the country, the article said, hundreds of ministers and pastors desperate to reach young congregants have drawn concern and criticism through their use of an unusual recruiting tool, the immersive and violent video game Halo. That's interesting. The latest iteration of the immensely popular space epic, Halo 3, was released nearly 2 weeks ago by Microsoft, past $300 million in sales. Those buying it must be 17 years old, given it is rated M for mature audiences. So they started tracking evangelical churches that were holding Halo nights to try and attract their key demographic, young adolescent males. And those people were missing from church. Now let me preface the rest of this story by saying this. I believe that those who did what I'm about to talk about had the right intentions. They were trying to get in contact with those young men. But as the New York Times was watching this, Washington Conference, that one right there. Thank you. They asked this question. The article ends with this question. What price to appear relevant? And I'm thinking, if they see the problem there, why don't we? You can't fool people into the kingdom of God. You can't bait and switch. You can't convince somebody to be interested in spiritual things if they have zero interest. You can't do it. It's not a biblical possibility. Now, there's very few people that are not interested in spiritual things because I'm convinced that the Spirit of God is at work in every human heart. The Bible says in the book of Romans that nobody has an excuse because they can see Him in the things that are made. That tells me there's very few people who are genuinely convinced there is absolutely no God. So that means your audience is huge. It's the principle. Work where they're working. I was driving across the state of Missouri a while back, and I heard an ad on the radio for the Church of God Chicken Grill. And I'm thinking, I have got to... What in the... Oh, that takes forever to load because it's got videos. It's 682 slides this afternoon's presentation. You think I'm joking. Church of God Chicken Grill. I thought, I have got to know what in the world is the Church of God Chicken Grill, so I looked it up. And the Church of God Chicken Grill was a church that couldn't attract a key demographic. They couldn't attract men to church. It's a Church of God. And so they thought, what are we going to do? We'll have barbecues after church on Sunday afternoon. They have a chicken barbecue. And apparently, whoever was doing the cooking knew how to cook because they had no problem pulling a crowd for the barbecue. They had hundreds of men show up for the barbecue. And every week, the barbecue got bigger and bigger and bigger. And the church service got smaller and smaller and smaller. And eventually they closed the church and renamed the whole outfit the Church of God Chicken Grill. Still a restaurant today. There's no church left. You can't bait and switch. 20 years ago, the Lutherans were concerned that they couldn't get young men into church. And in Sweden, they decided, we've got just the tactic. We're going to publish a special edition of the Bible for young men. It was the supermodel edition of the Bible. And in the margins, I'm not making this stuff up. In the margins of the Bible, they put bikini-clad supermodels. And they flew off the shelves. They sold millions of copies. But those young men were not reading the articles, if you get my drift. And they still were shuttering churches. You can't bait and switch. It doesn't work. I've built my ministry in recent years on some promises from God. Ecclesiastes 3, verse 11 says that God has put eternity in the human heart. That means no matter how much you logically are convinced that maybe there is no God, there's still something in your heart that screams out when everything's wrong in this life. Some years ago, somebody said to me, you know what, Douglas Adams just died. You know Douglas Adams, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy? In that story, they programmed the supercomputer to answer the question of the meaning of life. I forget, yeah, you've read it. Shame on you.
There was a movie too.
Yeah, there was a movie too. 5 million years it works on it, spits out the answer 42. The message is there is no meaning to life. None. Douglas Adams is a nihilist. Doesn't believe in anything. So they're burying Douglas Adams after he dies, and it was Cliff Goldstein said to me, you got to watch this funeral. I said, I don't want to watch an atheist funeral. It's so depressing. They were all there. Dawkins was there. I think Christopher Hitchens showed up. They're all there. What do you say at an atheist funeral, right? What do you say? It's just like you gather and send them off because there's no hope. I mean, it's one of the most hopeless things. But Cliff says, watch this. And at the end of the ceremony, I don't know if it's still archived at the BBC's website, but you've got to watch this if it is. They plant a tree on the grave. Why? If you're logically convinced that that's it and that's the end, why would you plant a tree? What's that symbolic of? There's something inside you that no matter how much you know you're going to die, when it actually comes to it, when your friend is being buried or when you're in your last 10 minutes of life, everything in your being screams, there's something wrong with this. It's not supposed to be this way. God's planted eternity in the human heart. I've preached every audience knowing I don't care what kind of a front you put up. There's eternity in your heart, and your heart tells you there's something wrong with this place, and death is wrong. You have that in your favor when you're preaching to the public. I weave it through every sermon, every single sermon. I don't ask the question straight up, and I don't say that straight up, but I weave it through every sermon because God says there's eternity in the human heart. Daniel 12, verse 4 is another great promise. You know that one. Seal up the book, Daniel, to the time of the end. Knowledge will increase, many will run to and fro. I got that backwards. Shame on me as an Adventist evangelist, but I can never quote things quite right, and I never know where they're actually found. I'm like the Apostle Paul. He's always writing somewhere it is written. That's because he can't remember where. I'll let you think about that. Well, I don't know. Can you remember every reference when you're in somebody's home? I can't. Many will run to and fro, knowledge will increase. We, to our discredit, have applied that to technology in our evangelistic meetings. We said, well, see, we got space shuttles and iPhones. That's proof that we're living in the last days. Well, it's true that science and technology happen to flourish in places that have a Christian heritage because the original scientists like Newton and others, those who gave us the theorems we needed to develop that technology, were actually looking for the order in the universe, and they believed in a creator God that there was order to be discovered. So in that regard, there's some truth to that statement, but that's not the knowledge that Daniel's talking about. It just finished saying that the book of Daniel would be sealed up till the time of the end, and then knowledge would increase. It's knowledge of the book of Daniel. Now the promise comes in the many shall run to and fro. We've often said, see, we hop on a jet, we can get to London in 4 hours, and that's not what it's talking about. In the original language, now the Hebrew scholars in the Bible will take me out behind the shed after for the way I pronounce stuff, but it doesn't matter. Many will run to and fro. That running to and fro, the word is like shoot. It's like S-H-U-T with an umlaut over the... I can't quite pronounce it. You know what it is? It literally was used by the Hebrews for rowing a boat back and forth over a stream as quickly as you could. But that's not really what they meant by the word. That was its literal meaning. Its figurative meaning, the way they used it, was examine the scrolls carefully. That's what it means. In the last days, knowledge of this book will increase, Daniel, and many will examine the scrolls carefully. So I'm thinking, that's a promise. In the last days, as we get into the wrap-up, your audience is going to be many. We don't have to, people say, oh, people aren't interested in prophecy anymore. Yeah, tell that to the History Channel and Discover Network, because every time they can, they run specials on Nostradamus and the end of the world and apocalypse and climate change, and they're cashing in on the idea that people have that it's not business as usual. Many run to and fro. I don't bait and switch. I still advertise prophecy when I hit the public. Do you know why I advertise prophecy? Because I am convinced that many will be interested, number one. And number two, I'm not looking for everybody. I'm looking for those who are interested, and they always show up in droves. So I don't bait and switch. I don't start with archaeology because I don't know anything about it. If I did, I might start with archaeology and weave my way in. Some people are really gifted at that. I know Dan's gifted at it, and some others are. I'm not, so I don't bait and switch. I advertise what I promise to deliver. Isaiah 54, enlarge the place of your tent, verse 2. Lengthen your cords, strengthen your stakes. You will break out on the right hand and the left. Your seed shall inherit the Gentile nations. You shall not be ashamed. I got that way out of order, but it's all there in that passage. That's the passage that William Carey preached in 1792 in front of a bunch of Calvinist ministers in Northampton, England. And he's a shoe cobbler. He's not a theologian. And Calvinists didn't believe in evangelism because everybody's in or out anyway, right? You're either saved or lost the day you're born. So what's the point of preaching? And he says, well, if God intends for us to lengthen our cords and strengthen our stakes and make the tent bigger, what's he talking about? We're going to inherit the Gentile nations? Our tent will expand? He said, and then when he got down off the platform, he thought, if I'm going to preach it, I'm going to do it. He got on a boat and went to India and launched the modern missionary movement, 1790s, just in time for the Millerite movement to need a missionary movement to help it along. The British and Foreign Bible Society, born in that same, the 1790s were a great decade. It was like God setting the table for everything we were going to need in the Millerite movement forward. The Bible societies, the missionary movements, everything's there in place by the time we start. God gets there first. All right, what else? Daniel 7, verse 9, a numberless crowd on the Sea of Crystal. That's our target audience. People say evangelists are into numbers. Shame on you. I am into numbers. I'm not ashamed of that. The more the better, because numbers are human beings. I'm glad I was in the number that got baptized the night I got baptized. There were 72 of us that night. That number was very exciting to the church because that's 72 human beings. Every number is somebody that God knows by name. Every single one of them. God loves numbers. Wouldn't name a whole book of the Bible numbers if he didn't. I know, exegetically that was really, really bad, but... Revelation 18, verse 1, I saw another angel come down from heaven. Shout with a loud voice. The earth was lighted with his glory. Our work is not destined to peter out. People say the days of evangelism were in the golden days were in the past, 50s, 60s, 70s, but that's over now. Nonsense. The Bible says that before Christ comes, the whole world lights up with his glory. It is not going to peter out. It's not going to fizzle out. We're not going to go out in a whimper in the darkness. The whole world lights up with the glory of Jesus Christ. We have everything to gain. Noah preached 120 years and only baptized his family. We all know he would have been unfaithful if he wouldn't have preached anyway. We've been handed a whole lot more than that. We've been handed a guarantee that the whole world lights up. And I know it's tough work. Sometimes you feel like you're beating your head against the wall and you try and you try and you try and it doesn't seem to go well and it doesn't seem to go well. But invariably the floodgates will open. I've seen it every time. I've sometimes worked a territory for years and years and years and think nothing happens. We loaded Bibles on a sled a while back and went up to the Arctic Circle where we're pretty sure that Adventists hadn't been preaching meetings. Gave out Bibles in the Inuktitut language and didn't go all that great, except I got a Christmas card this year, 5 years, 6 years later, from a lady. It was all written in Inuktitut. I had to admit to her finally that I didn't speak Inuktitut. I've been faking it. I've been using a Government of Canada website and transposing their phrases into letters that I was sending up to the Arctic Circle. I had to admit I had been faking that all along, but it was a letter saying, I'm keeping the Sabbath now and I need Bible studies to lead the rest of the village to Christ. 6, 7 years later, after I'd given up on it. It's a guarantee from God. In your notes, page 3. Got so much I want to cover. And I've got this and another session this afternoon and one tomorrow morning, right? We're going to try and really plow corn. Is it okay with you if I cover irresponsible quantities of information?
Please. Yes.
All right. I'm going to do it whether you like it or not. So, this chapter has given me more material than any other chapter in all the writings of Ellen White. Gospel Workers, page 136. Some of what we talked about this morning is actually in here. In a dream given me, September 29, 1886. This is Boonster Reading Theater this afternoon. I know you can read it for yourselves, but let me take you through it anyway. In a dream given me September 29, 1886, I was walking with a large company who were looking for berries. There were many young men and women in the company who were to help in gathering the fruit. First point, the work of evangelism is not the work of one or two people. It's always many. God doesn't expect the pastor to do all the work. He expects the pastor to be a mentor and a coach and put many men and women to work in the field to find those people that are interested that God is waking up. We seemed to be in the city, for there was very little vacant ground. But around the city there were open fields, beautiful groves, cultivated gardens. A large wagon laden with provisions for our company went before us. Soon the wagon halted, and the party scattered in every direction to look for fruit. All around the wagon were both high and low bushes, bearing large, beautiful whortleberries. Haven't got a clue what a whortleberry is. For years I've asked people. Somebody brought me a Wikipedia entry once. I don't know what a whortleberry is. When I get to heaven, you guys will have questions for Ellen White when you meet her. This is my one question. What in the world is a whortleberry? What's that?
Blueberries.
Is it a blueberry? A whortleberry is a blueberry. Why didn't she just say blueberries? No, why didn't she say blueberry? She didn't. Ellen White was colorblind, so she called them whortleberries. Never all black and white in those days. Everything was sepia toned in 1886. All right. But the company were all looking, here it comes, listen to this. The company were all looking too far away to see them. The best work is closest to home. I began to gather the fruit nearby. She says this at least 4 times in this vision, that it's nearby. I began to gather the fruit nearby, but very carefully for fear of picking green berries. They're not ready yet. If you try to convince people and they're not convinced yet, they're green. Don't pick them. We're after the ripe ones, which were so mingled with the ripe that I could only pick 1 or 2 berries from a cluster. Some of the nice large berries had fallen to the ground and were half consumed by worms and insects. Here's the other end of the scale. It's possible to become overripe. That's why we have to be in the community every week. Every week. Oh, I thought, if this field had only been entered before, all this precious fruit might have been saved. But it's too late now. I will, however, pick these from the ground and see if there is any good in them. Notice she mentions there's actually a window of opportunity. There's always fruit that is ripening in the community. You can hold an evangelistic campaign this year, and next year there'll be more ripe fruit. It wasn't ripe this year, but it'll be ripe next year. You can work the same ground if you do it biblically over and over and over again. It's too late now. Even if the whole berry is spoiled, I'll show at least the brethren what they might have found if it had not been too late. Just then, 2 or 3 of the party came sauntering around where I was. They were chatting and seemed to be much occupied with each other's company. Seeing me, they said, "We have looked everywhere and can find no fruit." They looked with astonishment at the quantity I had. There's always more than you think. Always. I said, "There are more to be gathered from these bushes." They began picking, but soon stopped, saying, "It's not fair for us to pick here. You found this spot, and the fruit is yours." But I replied, "This makes no difference. Gather wherever you can find anything. This is God's field. These are His berries. It is your privilege to pick them." There's so much in that sentence. This is God's work. He's driving it. It's all His, and your privilege is to be there picking it. That's what it's saying. Not only that, though, it's really an argument against territorialism. If you have a number of churches in a city, I've discovered something interesting over the years. The more concerned your church is about making sure that its interests end up in their pews, the less likely you are to have a large baptism. The more generous a church is, the less they care about which church the interests end up in. Invariably, they have the biggest baptisms. It always works that way. The more generous you are, the more generous God is. Always. But soon I seemed to be alone again. Every little while I heard talking and laughing at the wagon. I called out to those who were there, "What are you doing?" They answered, "We could not find any berries. And as we were tired and hungry, we thought we'd come to the wagon and take a lunch." It's a shame to be reading this right after lunch, isn't it? "After we rested a while, we will go out again." But I said, "You've brought in nothing yet. You're eating up all our supplies without giving us any more." Is it possible to be a spiritual freeloader? Is it possible? "I cannot eat now. There's too much fruit to be picked." You did not find it. Why? Because you did not look close enough. Get in the community. We got to get our members in the community. So often we're cloistered. The reason we're unkind, our churches, sometimes, is because we don't know any non-Adventists. It's really hard to be unkind out in the big bad world when you're the only Adventist in the room. It's time to get our members into the community. You did not find because you did not look. It does not hang on the outside of the bushes. You must search for it. True, you cannot pick it by handfuls, but by looking carefully among the green berries, you will find very choice fruit. My small pail was soon full of berries, and I took them to the wagon. Said I, "This is the nicest fruit that I ever picked, and I gathered it nearby," there it is again, "while you have wearied yourselves by searching at a distance without success." Then all came to see the fruit. They said, "These are high bush berries, firm and good." We did not think we could find anything on the high bushes. Never ever rule any group of people out. Don't rule out the upper class, the lower class, the white collar, the blue collar. If you rule them out, you'll never win them. You'll never win them if you say they're unwinnable. People say, "Hey, this doesn't work." Well, it'll never work if you don't believe it will. That's right. I mean, that's the number one thing. People say evangelism doesn't work. Well, it doesn't if you don't believe it. But it's amazing if you do believe it, how well it works. I've been doing this 20 years, and I've had meetings from 7 people in the audience to 25,000 sitting in the audience. Not once have I ever come home empty-handed. Not because we're good at it. I give some of the worst sermons in the history of the Seventh-day Adventist movement, bar none. I mean, those who have heard it, that's not what it is. They're always there. If you believe God's got interests, you will always find them. But if you believe they're not there, how in the world will you ever find them? It has everything to do with our faith. Where am I? I was getting a sermon out of every sentence. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to preach today. Then I said, "Will you take care of these berries and go with me to look for more fruit on the high bushes?" But they made no preparation to care for the fruit. Oh. Yeah, we could talk a lot about pre-work and post-work there, but so often we failed to plan for the aftercare of the berries. We got no place to put them. We didn't think that far ahead. We didn't expect to find any, and so we didn't get ready for them. There were dishes and sacks in abundance, but they had been used to hold food. We use our resources for us. I mean, what would it look like? I mean, if we were to put our budget in front of a non-Adventist consultant, our church budget, and say our priority is evangelism, would they believe it? Interesting thought. I became tired of waiting and finally asked, "Did you not come to gather fruit? Then why are you not prepared to take care of it?" One responded, "Sister White, we did not really expect to find any fruit." This is painful, and I feel a little pain every time I read through this. "We did not expect to find any fruit where there were so many houses and so much going on, but as you seemed so anxious to gather fruit, we decided to come with you. We thought we'd bring enough to eat and would enjoy the recreation if we did not gather any fruit." Well, there's a lot of church members watching the pastor gather fruit. I answered, "I cannot understand this kind of work. I shall go to the bushes again at once." I always laugh when I read that out loud because going to the bushes meant something completely different to my dad. "I cannot understand. I shall go to the bushes again at once. The day is already far spent. Soon the night will be here in which we can gather no fruit." Do you hear the sense of urgency? Soul winners have a sense of urgency. And I've discovered something. If you don't have one and you ask God for one, you will get one. You will get a sense of urgency. I answered, "I cannot understand this kind of work." Oh, here it is. In one place, a little company had collected and were busily talking about something in which they had seemed much interested. I drew near and found that a little child in a woman's arms had attracted their attention. I said, "You have but a little time and might better work while you can." Sense of urgency again. The attention of many was attracted by a young man and a young woman who were running a race to the wagon. There's so much for our church to do, isn't it? We can be so busy with things. On reaching it, they were so tired they had to sit down and rest. Others also had thrown themselves down on the grass to rest. Thus the day wore on and very little was accomplished. At last I said, "Brethren, you call this an unsuccessful expedition. If this is the way you work, I do not wonder at your lack of success. Your success or failure depends upon the way you take hold of the work." God's work is organized and planned and intentional. There are berries here, for I have found them. Some of you have been searching the low bushes in vain. Others have found a few berries, but the high bushes have been passed by, simply because you did not expect to find fruit. You see that the fruit which I have gathered is large and ripe. In a little while, other berries will ripen. There it is again. You can cover the ground again and again and again. Pick what's ripe, leave what's green. We can go over the bushes again. This is the way in which I was taught to gather fruit. If you had searched near the wagon, you might have found the fruit as well as I. The lesson, this one stings. The lesson that you have this day given to those who are just learning how to do this kind of work will be copied by them. Our kids are going to do it the way we did it. They're going to do it the way we did it. We owe it to them to show them how God intends for us to work. The Lord has placed these fruit-bearing bushes right in the midst of these thickly settled places. Do you hear a promise for successful urban evangelism there? Because I sure do. And He expects you to find them. But you've been altogether too much engaged in eating and amusing yourselves. You did not come to the field with an earnest determination to find fruit. You must hereafter work with more zeal and earnestness and with an altogether different object in view, or your labors will never be successful. By working in the right way, you will teach the younger workers that such matters as eating and recreation are of minor importance. It has been hard work to bring the wagon of supplies to the ground, but you have thought more of the supplies than of the fruit you ought to carry home as the result of your labors. You should be diligent first to pick the berries nearest you, and then to search for those farther away. After that, you can return and work nearby again, and thus you'll be successful. There must be about 36 valuable points in there. I'll leave that with you. But that chapter I read before every evangelistic campaign on my knees the night before opening night, and I go through it again and again and again. And it's full of promises. There's great fruit in thickly settled places. There's great fruit there. And I have yet to have God not show me where they are if I go in with the right attitude. Attitude makes all the difference. That's why she says you got to preach with a different object in view. The way you think makes a big difference. Now, I'm not going to go back and give a first century evangelism lesson. I'll tell you what I was going to cover, though. People often say, yeah, but Paul had it easier because he didn't have the cultural barriers that we have. Oh, I've heard that everywhere I go. Paul didn't have the cultural barriers. His were far worse than ours. Far worse than ours. That's what that class was going to be about. Again, it would have been life-changing, but we don't have time for that. So let me find what gathering the fruit, we did that. Path to success, preaching the word, visitation, the appeal, and there we go. And again, I'm in the place where I started. Is everything making sense to you so far? Yes? No? All right. Yes?
I would like to hear pastoral reactions to what you just
Okay. Let me look at the clock. Yeah. Let's take about 5 minutes, and then I'll get into the rest of the material.
I have just a question with your view on, you said the more generous we are about letting converts go to another church, the larger our baptisms will be.
Generally speaking, that's been my experience.
Would that apply to non-Adventist
No,
churches?
that's not what I meant.
Okay.
That's not what I meant at all. I'm talking about several Adventist churches in one community. The more they fight about where the people are baptized and join, the lower the results go. But I'm talking amongst Adventist churches. Yeah. No, I don't. Look, I come from another church. I know there are Christians in other churches. I believe that with all my heart. And many of them are better Christians than us. But God asked me to bring people home to the Adventist church. So, anyway. Okay, let's keep trucking. I know there are more reactions. Maybe we take a little more time tomorrow for some reactions to this stuff because I really do want to cover an irresponsible amount of information. Let's talk about how to weave this philosophy into your approach a little bit. And I wish this were better organized. I think there's a page for appeals in the handout that I gave you. But let's talk about altar calls. When it comes time for the altar call, and we talked about this morning a little bit, we need to understand that God gets there first. And so we need to understand the difference between convincing the audience and appealing to them. Those are two different altar calls. If you try to talk people into conversion in an altar call, it will not succeed. You can't do it. You can't talk me into an altar call if I don't want to accept Christ. It won't work. The reason I know that is I sat in I don't know how many evangelistic meetings as a kid. Billy Graham, I got dragged everywhere. My family was so worried about me. They dragged me to Bible camp. They dragged me all kinds of places. And they tried everything to try and convince me to be interested in spiritual things. I remember being dragged to a Christian rock concert. I said, well, he's going to love this because this kid's wild and he loves his rock music. And I sat there listening to the Christian rock band, and I turned to the Baptists who drugged me out there, and they said, what do you think? I said, well, they said, no, be honest. What do you think? I said, you guys aren't even good at this. You're not even good at this. I was at a Meatloaf concert a couple of weeks ago, and he's good at this. You guys stink. No, I'm being on. You don't mind me being blunt, do you? Because I don't know any other way. You can't fool people into the kingdom of God. I wasn't ready and I wasn't interested. You couldn't fool me into it. But when I was under conviction, I ended up in an evangelistic meeting, and the appeals that were made were an appeal to the fact that God was already working on me. There is a huge difference. You can't talk people into the kingdom of God, but you can appeal to them to act on the conviction that they feel. And that's a more powerful altar call every single time. Right? Know your audience personally before you call them. Real decisions usually happen in the home. 85% of the decisions I get in an altar call were already made in the home before the altar call. They happen when I'm visiting in the home. And I have never baptized, I don't know about you folks, but I have never baptized somebody that I don't know personally. It takes all that time in the home. You know what I mean. With Bible work, I've never baptized somebody I don't know. That's why visitation is so important, and we'll spend some time talking about that. It's about getting to know who you're appealing to. I don't know what to say in that altar call unless I figure out where God is working in their life. And now I can start appealing to specific people in that altar call without mentioning their name and embarrassing them, because I know where God's working in their lives. So I'm in the homes. I get to know everybody personally, and I try when I'm preaching to make eye contact with every single person in the room every single night. When there's 5 people, it's easy. When there's 2,000, it's not so easy, but I still try to do it because the eyes give it away. You know when the moment of conviction is falling on that audience. They start to come. You can just see it on their faces. Some of you know exactly what I'm talking about. That's when you know now's the time for an appeal. I watch their faces. I know them personally. Know the decision that you're after before you preach your sermon, and have a 1-point sermon every night. Get rid of the idea in evangelism of 3-point sermons. Know what the one thing you want the audience to decide is before you start. When I preach Daniel 2, I always do it opening night. People say, you still preach Daniel 2 opening night in a postmodern secular culture? Absolutely. Because a postmodern doesn't know quite what to believe and doesn't have any certainty, isn't sure if there's a God or objective truth. And by the time you're done with Daniel 2, there's one thing that has happened for sure. They have to admit they might be wrong. That's it. That's it. The whole point in Daniel 2, for me, is when Daniel says to Nebuchadnezzar, there is a God in heaven. I'm thinking, that's perfect for this day and age. That's the one point we're going to preach tonight. And I weave it through the whole sermon about every 5 minutes, and I make a little appeal as I go along, building to the big appeal. But I want to know what the decision is before I even preach. Sometimes I'll even tell the audience, maybe not opening night, but 5 nights into a campaign, I'll tell them what the decision is that they're supposed to make before I start preaching. Sometimes I even give them the decision card before the meeting starts. Which, you do that? I said, yeah. First time somebody told me to try that, I thought, you're out of your mind. I like to spring the decision card on them as a surprise at the end. But not only do you lose all kinds of time, now they have to think about the decision. If I tell them up front, at the beginning of the sermon, look, this book has changed my life, and it's almost impossible to come to this book and not be changed somehow, and I want to hear back from you tonight if God has spoken to you through what we're studying. Opening night, that might be too forward, but a few nights in, you can do that. And then I put a card in their hand saying, here's the decision I want you to think about as I'm speaking tonight. You look at this card, and you tell me when God speaks to you, you fill that in, and I'll ask you about it at the end of the meeting. It's in their hand the whole time. They're making the decision at that moment when they can. If they come under conviction 20 minutes in, they can fill in the card 20 minutes in, and in the next 40 minutes, I don't kill their decision with the rest of what I say. So I hand it out ahead of time. I know what the one thing I want them to decide each night is, and sometimes I'll tell them what it is that I want them to decide, and then I appeal to it. Is this making sense to you so far? Yes. Is this useful to you? Yes. This is about half the room there. Appeal to the big universal questions of life. I weave them into every sermon no matter what. I don't ask them, but everybody struggles with the purpose of their life at some point. If they haven't, it's just they haven't lived long enough yet. They all want to know that it means something. Psychologically, our greatest need is not love. Love's important. I mean, we know what happens. Little babies that aren't loved, they don't thrive in the orphanages. The ones that get picked up and held and sung to, they thrive. Love is important, but it's not our most important need. Our most important need as human beings is to know that our lives actually mean something. That when we're done here and it's time to cross the finish line, that our life had a purpose on this planet, that we meant something to somebody, somehow, somewhere. We want to know that when somebody goes to the graveyard 10 years after we're dead and sees our name on a headstone, that they'll actually know something about us, that we're not just a name and a date. Everybody has that need eventually, so I weave it through every sermon. There are big universal questions. Death, love, sex, all these things that people think about all the time, they're in the Bible. They're in almost every story. And I weave them through all the time with a mind to the idea that the audience has those questions and they don't have the answers. So I weave them into every sermon. Sometimes just with an illustration, sometimes an outright statement, but they're there in almost every sermon because you're building to that appeal at the end. You're trying to stir and figure out where it is that God's speaking to those people and on which issues. I weave the appeal throughout the sermon. I don't wait for the end and spring the appeal on them. I mentioned that already. I make the appeal every 3, 4, 5 minutes. Sometimes I'll almost start an altar call, then I'll go back to my sermon. And then 5 minutes later, I'll almost start another altar call and go back to the sermon. You know what's happening? They're leaning forward. They're getting ready to make a decision. I'm trying to... How many of you are fly fishermen? Yeah, you don't want to admit it in front of all the vegans, but... You know, I like fly fishing. I look at our message. Every night I get to put a different lure on the line. Billy Graham's got one lure, and it's a good one. Basic gospel message. I really respect Billy Graham. I'm sorry to see him pass off the scene. Because, you know, one thing, he's got a couple things absolutely right. Number one, he's got this untarnished gospel message. Just you need Jesus, you're a sinner, you need His forgiveness, and you can come home. Man, that's powerful. And I wish sometimes we actually spent more time on that one. No question about it. The other thing he's done is he's kept his nose clean of scandal for 60-some years. He kept himself clean. Whatever else we think about his ministry, it's been good. But he's got one lure. I got 28. And I can put a different lure on the line every night, and I throw it out over the stream, and I watch the fish come to the surface. For somebody, it's the plain gospel message. Well, finally they'll get it. Jesus loves me. This is for me. On another night, I put State of the Dead on there, and I throw it out over the stream, and it lands on the water and another fish comes up. Now God makes sense to that person. This is their need. This is what speaks to them. The Sabbath for somebody else. I mean, for me, it was the assurance of salvation that they finally hooked me. I listened to all the doctrine, but I had always struggled. All my life I'd struggled. I'd go to Baptist Bible camp. I'd get sent there, my family praying desperately that something will happen, and I would watch them. They had this ceremony on the last night of Bible camp, and all the kids were supposed to take a piece of kindling and throw it in the fire, and that was symbolic of you old life passing away and a new life with Jesus starting. And these kids would tell these stories one after the other. Oh, when I prayed the sinner's prayer, it was like electricity went through my body. And they told these stories and they were trying to outdo each other, 8, 9, 10 years old. You know, practically angels are appearing in their cabin overnight. And I'm thinking as I'm listening to those stories, why doesn't any of that ever happen to me? I recited that prayer. I mean, I followed along after the pastor. Where's my miracle? Maybe God doesn't care. And I'll never forget the night the evangelist pulled out 1 John 5. These things I write unto you, that you may know that you have eternal life. And I thought, wait a minute. It doesn't say feel like. It says no. That's the night I bit. I bit that hook hard and they reeled me in. I mean, all the rest was interesting and there was conviction, but that's the night I bit. Every night, one of those different doctrines is a different lure for a different fish. I'm watching the faces and I'm making note which ones are showing interest on this topic because that's whose house I'm going to tomorrow. I watch their faces. State of the Dead one night, a Muslim woman walks in for the first time. She's 32 years old. And I'm thinking, what a night to start in on. And I could tell she was Muslim. You can just, you can see. And she came up after and says, I need to talk to you. I said, I'm pretty sure you probably do. What can I help you with? She said, that's the only thing I've ever heard that made sense. And I believe that God is real and somebody here needs to help me become a Christian. Can somebody do that tonight? Gave a Muslim woman a Bible study. That night she accepted Christ. It was the State of the Dead. Watch the faces. It's a different lure every night. I weave the appeal throughout the sermon. I never wait for the end. Oh, there it is. Think of our doctrines as a tackle box. I actually put that in there. Consider asking for the decision before you preach. Let me see what else I put in there. Never, ever preach without an appeal. There are nights you won't feel like it. Do it anyway. There are nights you'll plan a big altar call, and as you're getting down to the altar call, you know what I'm talking about. Jack, you'll know what I'm talking about. You'll think, that was not a very good sermon I just preached. I think I'll skip the altar call. Never skip the altar call, because it's not our work. You don't know who is under conviction. You have no idea who might respond. Never, ever skip an appeal. Ever. There are 2 kids I knew, 19 years old. They both like the same stuff. They like the same music. They like the same girls. They like the same cars. And one day, one of those boys gave his heart to Christ. I knew them both. And he tried to find the way to invite his non-believing friend to come to church or to accept Christ, and he could never find the word, so he skipped it. And that's when he got the word the next day. I mean, here's a real preacher story for you. Spurgeon says, don't cash in on too many dead people stories. But the non-believing friend died in a horrible, horrible car wreck. I mean, a horrible flaming death. The surviving friend went to go talk to the parents, and they were crying. They asked him to be a pallbearer. And he never asked. He just never asked. As you've probably already guessed, I'm the kid who survived. I'm the one who never asked. I was a brand new Christian and I never asked. And a voice kept saying, ask him, at least ask him to come. And I never did. And he's gone now. I'll never skip an appeal. It has so little to do with what I feel like. So little to do. There are nights I don't want to make an appeal because I'm a human being. I get cranky and grumpy and tired. Those who know me well know I'm cranky and grumpy and tired most of the time, but don't skip it. Never skip it. Because you can't see what's going on in the heart. And I've always been surprised when I have that appeal. Who comes forward? I give horrible appeals. But it has nothing to do with us. If you don't appeal, if you preach for 20-some nights and don't have an appeal, you're programming non-response into your audience. You're getting their expectation up, you're getting up the desire to act, and then you don't ask them to act, and you're programming them never to respond. That's what you're doing. You're helping condition their heart against responding to the gospel. Vary your response mechanism. I always keep them guessing. I don't have the same appeal every night. There's different things you can do. Have them raise their hand. Have them stand for prayer. Have them come down to the front. Vary the response mechanism every night so that it doesn't ever become a routine. Appeal very broadly at first and then narrow. Start with a call for prayer and have your team waiting. I picked this up from another evangelist, and it was really powerful. The first time I have an altar call, like a come to the front altar call in a series of evangelistic meetings, I make it as broad as possible. I appeal to everybody in the room, and I try and hit everything they might be interested in that first appeal. I might say, look, some of you have never made a decision for Christ, and tonight's the night, and you know it's the night, and I want to meet you down at the front and pray with you. Notice you're not putting a lot of pressure on them to come down to the front and show the whole world. Not at that point. Just say, I want to meet with you and pray with you. If you've wandered away from Christ, and you know you're not home right now, and you need to come home or you'd like to, and you just want to pray with somebody, come down to the front and I'll meet with you. Whatever it is, and I'll list a few other things that might be true. Come down to the front, and I line up all the elders or the deacons or some pastors, and we wait at the front and pray with those people. That's it. That's the first appeal. That's it. I let them come for prayer. You know what happens is they usually stay for 2 or 3 hours after that meeting just to pray and cry. It's amazing. And all of a sudden, I start figuring out where God's working with them. I could try and pre-program something, but it won't teach me what that moment teaches me when I let them tell me what it is that they need. And then you get narrower. You can get narrower in the appeal as you go along and challenge people, take your stand tonight, that kind of thing, but not in the beginning. You make it as broad as possible and get them used to coming for help. After you've had that experience praying together down at the front of the auditorium, at the front of your church, they're your friend for the rest of your life because you met their needs and you prayed with them and you showed your love for them, and it was low pressure. You can put on a high pressure appeal later. You don't really need to. You just keep appealing. But I start with a call for prayer. I talk to them about what's going on in their hearts, and I assume they're going to do the right thing. It's positive expectation. And I say, I want to come down and just pray with you. It's powerful. They'll come by the hundreds. Understand the logical progression of our message. This one, some of you may know and some of you may not know, but I find this really powerful. God is the one who gives people repentance. God is the one who wakes up their heart to things. God pre-programmed our church with a message for the last days. He said, here's the message I want you to preach. And sometimes we're tempted to second guess it because we don't think it's going to appeal to a particular audience, even though you can see in Scripture that they never ever vary the message. It's always come back to worship the one who made. That's the three angels' messages. It's the same intent as the three angels' messages. And we're tempted to vary it and change it. But not only did God give us an audience, He wakes up their heart, and He gives us a method, the foolishness of preaching. He actually lays out what to preach when. He lays it out. And what's interesting is this, you have a lot of latitude when you're working one-on-one with somebody in a Bible study. You can figure out exactly what their need is and what subject to cover next. But if you have a room full of people that you don't know, what order of subjects should you go through? They're all different people. Is there a general order of subjects that's better than others? And the answer to that is absolutely yes. Early Writings, page 358, Ellen White says something really remarkable. I was shown 3 steps. The first, second, and third angel's messages. Said my accompanying angel, woe to him who shall move a block or stir a pin of these messages. The true understanding of these messages is of vital importance. The destiny of souls hangs upon the manner in which they are received. Did you catch how straight she is on that? The destiny of souls hangs on the manner in which they're received. I was again brought down through these messages. She's starting to give the sense that there might be an order to it. And saw how dearly the people of God had purchased their experience. It had been obtained through much suffering and severe conflict. God had led them along how? She's talking about the birth of our movement. God had a subject order in the birth of our movement. He taught us things in a specific order until He had placed them upon a solid, immovable platform. In another place she says this. This is in Evangelism, page 256. Many who embraced the third message had not an experience in the 2 former messages. No, notice this. This is people that come in later and they get the subjects out of sequence. Satan understood this, and his evil eye was upon them to overthrow them, but the third angel was pointing them to the most holy place, and those who had an experience in the past messages were pointing them the way to the heavenly sanctuary. Many saw the perfect chain of truth in the 3 angels' messages, and gladly received them how? Oh, stay with me. I know it's after lunch, and nobody likes a workshop after lunch, but especially me. I always fall asleep partway through the presentation. But received them how? Oh, come on, stay with me. This is important. How? There you go. You do this to your congregation. I to you. In their order, and follow Jesus by faith into the heavenly sanctuary. These messages were represented to me as an anchor to the people of God. Those who understand and receive them will be kept from being swept away by the many delusions of Satan. Here's the gist of it. There's a definite best order of subject material for a broad audience. If you don't know your audience, there is a best way to do it. It's the order in which we learn this thing in the first place. People have often wondered, why do our Bible studies all seem to follow the same progression? It's not by accident. Why do most of the evangelists seem to follow the same subject order? It's not by accident. The general best order to follow is the order in which our movement learned this stuff in the first place. I refuse to believe this. I used to come out beasting people on night number 2 because it was just so much fun. I mean, here, Pacific Northwest, most of your audience is secular and atheist and unbelieving and skeptical, so you can come out with the little horn on night number 2, and they love it. You can't do that so much in New Mexico. But, you know, up in Vancouver, British Columbia, you come out with the beast on the second night. They love that. And I thought that works really well. But I discovered as I traveled that that didn't work so well everywhere. There's a general best order. It's not by accident. What is that order? Well, how did we learn this? Miller started by preaching the soon coming of Christ. It's the first message. He's coming soon. So I always start with Daniel 24 and Matthew 2 and Revelation 16 and some other real urgent type things, the signs of the times type things. Jesus is coming soon. That's where Miller started. The rest of the general order is found in the 3 angels' messages, and it's remarkable how much of it is actually there. So I always start with a night or 2 on signs of the times. Business, it's not business as usual on planet Earth. If I don't know the audience, it's the best place to start. So the second coming. Then it goes through the 3 angels' messages. I saw another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel. The next thing that I do is I preach a gospel presentation. I'll give them 2 or 3 nights of prophecy, and then I preach a gospel presentation. I don't know what it is that the audience knows or doesn't know, but I'll give them the gospel that night and invite them to accept Christ. They've heard He's coming. They've seen evidence that there probably is a God, and then they don't know what to do with the information, and so I have my first appeal on the gospel presentation, 4th, 5th night in, something like that. Right? Everlasting gospel to preach to those that dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people, saying with a loud voice, fear God and give glory to Him, for the hour of His judgment has come. Next subject I hit, people say, really? I said, yeah, really. After the gospel presentation, I hit the sanctuary and the judgment. I do Daniel 8 and 9 next. You can go after it from the book of Hebrews. You can go after it from everywhere. But I bring them, they've seen Jesus, they've heard the gospel presentation. Now it's time to bring them back to the signs of the times and underline the fact that there's not a lot of time left to make a decision. I love this. You know, people say, really, you still do 1844 and the judgment message and all that stuff? Absolutely. Out of hundreds of thousands of people that God has privileged me to preach that to, do you know how many objections I've had to the idea that we're living in the judgment hour since 1844? Do you know how many? 0. All over the planet, not one objection from a single guest. The only people who complain? Seventh-day Adventists. Let me tell you, it sells in the general public. They can't believe it. They're so excited. We are in the last moment, the beginning of the end. I mean, I set the table. I'll give them Revelation 6. I'll do the 7 seals because it ends in 1833. Or the 7 seals. 7 seals. The 4 horsemen, the 7 seals. I do that on purpose. I end in 1833, and the next night I give them Daniel 8 and 9 because that ends in 1844, and it just makes sense to them. Okay, that's what's next. It's the judgment hour. But I cover it next. Do I ask everybody before they join the church to be able to diagram the 2,300 days? No, because 85% of our church members can't do it. I'd put it to the test. I go to potluck and they can't do it. I mean, a lot of my converts can by the time I'm really done with them. But they need to understand that they have a high priest in heaven who is fully human and fully God and stands at the head of the human race now representing us before God's throne, and that with boldness they can go to the throne of God in the judgment hour, and they can pass with flying colors not because of who they are, but because of who Christ is. That's what I want them to understand.
Question.
Yeah.
When you preach the gospel presentation, you preach them the necessity of both a lamb and a priest in order for forgiveness to take place, because that's what the Bible says. The priest shall make atonement, and their sins shall be forgiven. He has to have an offering for which to make the atonement with. You have to have both, so it does set up naturally. You have the Lamb of God.
Yeah, that would be a great sermon.
Work.
No, that's not the sermon I preach, but that'd be a good one.
No, just like a presentation.
Yeah. No, that works great. Sanctuary and judgment. Okay? Then worship him who made heaven, the earth, the sea, and the springs of waters. Move from there into the law and the Sabbath. Then from there, another angel followed, saying, Babylon is fallen. This is where I really had to repent and stop beasting people on the second night of my meetings. Babylon is fallen. It's much further down, that great city, because she's made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. Truth first, error next. Then a third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, if anyone worships the beast in his image, receives his mark on his forehead or his hand, then we get into the mark of the beast. This is a general order. You can tailor it a little bit, but this is the general flow. He himself shall also drink of the wine of the wrath of God, which is poured out full strength into his cup of his indignation. He shall be tormented with fire and brimstone in the presence of the Lamb. We talk about the fate of the wicked way down in the meetings. Then you got the state of the dead. Here's the patience of the saints. Here are those who keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. You get down into the concept of the remnant church and the spirit of prophecy. Somehow that's supposed to stay there while I click, but it doesn't, so I'll go back and forth like 5 times. Wondering kind of how long you're going to put up with me doing that. Right. Remnant. Then I heard a voice from heaven, write, here's the state of the dead. It's in there too. Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors and their works which follow them. It's a general subject order, but there is a method to the madness. People have often said, why do you preach that order? Well, when I started doing it, even though still to this day, logically, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me because it's not the order I learned it in, I discovered that the results went through the roof if I stuck with the order that the movement learned this stuff in the first place. God didn't make a mistake when he taught us this stuff the first time around. It was a very diverse, very broad audience. Some people had pantheistic leanings, some people had Arian leanings, some people were Pentecostal, some people were Presbyterian. How do you approach that group? God brought them all through the subject order together. And if you stick with it, generally speaking, it goes better in broad audiences. Does that make sense to you? Is that useful to you? No? All right. Let's keep going. I'm not going to go into my subject order. We could spend hours on that. Let's get into the home.
Sean?
Yes, sir.
The Bible studies that we use, is there like a set that you could recommend that corresponds with this general order?
Yeah, the one that I use most often is Search for Certainty. I want to write my own eventually so that it matches my evangelistic meetings. But I use Search for Certainty. It just seems to be the most comprehensive. And what I do is, while I'm preaching, every night I open a Bible school during my meeting. I invite people to go take a lesson tonight, and I try and pair it with the subject they've studied. That's my personal favorite, is Search for Certainty. There's a lot of good ones, but that one generally follows it.
Sean, with the move that you're doing, are you still going to do the open source Bibles?
Yeah, absolutely. That stays alive. Yeah, it is. We're almost done. There was another hiccup, I was told, on the technology. Oh, yeah. Let me tell you, know what? When it comes to Bible studies, I don't know how many of you have come into the issue that there are a lot of great Bible studies that are really close to what you'd like, but if you could have your own, it would be just a little bit different. Right? I remember way back when Revelation seminars, I used to use their stuff, but they did Michael the Archangel in lesson 1 or 2, and it just opened up this can of worms that I didn't want in the first 2 lessons with the general public. And I always wished I could change that. So what we're doing at the division is developing something that we're calling open source Bible study. It'll be a basic set of Bible studies online for pastors to use. And it's editable. You can open up your own account. You can edit the lessons to suit your specific needs. You can add extra lessons in. You know, one thing that's always missing in a set of lessons is marriage and family. And up here in the Northwest, man, do you need lessons on marriage and family, right? Up in Canada, 1/3 of my interests were always living common law minimum. I almost had to have a drive-through wedding chapel at every campaign I ever had. And marriage and family, but most of the lessons have nothing on that. You can add in a few, and at the end, it'll print out PDF or it'll put out a professional file so that you can go and get them printed, or you can print them yourself on a color printer, and they'll all look the same. They'll fold up beautifully, look great, and it'll look like it was always part of the series, but you can tailor it, you can brand it to your church, you can brand it however you want. So that's what we're talking about, and yes, it's still on target.
What's the timeline for that?
Should be available this summer. Should be available this summer at the NAD's website. I'm glad you asked that, because Larry actually called me and said, hey, you're leaving. I said, yeah. He said, are we still on? Absolutely. I want that for myself. I would like lessons that actually match my evangelistic meetings so that they can take a lesson home. Here's what I want to happen with the audience. I want to preach my way. By the time I baptize somebody, they've heard the entire message 3 times. 4 times if I'm lucky, because there's been Bible work going on and they've already been through a set of lessons. But they'll hear me preach my way all the way through it. I'll open a Bible school during the meetings and they go through an entire set of lessons. And then I have a baptismal class where we go through it one more time. And 3 seems to be the magic number. When somebody's been through the message 3 times, it's almost impossible to keep them out of the baptistry unless they're really hardened. So thank you for asking that. Any other questions? I only have 15 minutes left in this segment. I want to get into the homes. Yeah? Absolutely. They're completely editable online, and it'll spit out a PDF, and that will either be 8.5 by 11 or it will be 5.5 by 8.5 so that it folds into a booklet and looks like a traditional Bible study, but branded with your graphics and your church and everything. You can add it whatever you want. You can write an entire new series of lessons that will look the same. You can change them however you want. And the beauty of it is that if somebody comes up with a real winner and say they write those 3 or 4 lessons on marriage and family and they're really good, and I've always wanted some like that, we'll put them in the pool for all pastors across the division to have access to them so that we're all growing off of each other. We have too few people adding to the riches of the church. And it's time, I mean, look at the pastoral force. We've got 4,500, 5,000 pastors in the division. Man, there's a lot of experience that we could be tapping into, and that's kind of the idea behind it. All right, let's talk about visitation. We'll pick this up after the break. What time is my next one after this? 3:30. All right. Oh, it's just like a 45-minute break. Is this useful? Yeah. All right. Even if it's not, this is what I brought, so this is what we're going to do. Let's talk about visitation. There seems to be something. Ellen White, gospel workers. This should go without saying, but let's talk about it. Now, what we're going to talk about now becomes kind of mechanical in its approach, but I want to cover it anyway. Some of you will say, man, we knew that, but I'm hoping even if you've heard it before, you'll glean something that'll help you, because all the battles are won in the home for me. I don't know how it is for you. But as I said earlier, 85% of the decisions I get in the home. They'll still come forward in the altar call, but I already know by the time I have the call that they're going to come forward because we already have the decision in the home. By personal labor, she says, reach the people where they are. Become acquainted with them. This work cannot be done by proxy. This part hurts for a preacher. Sermons from the pulpit cannot do it. Teaching the Scriptures in families. This is the work of an evangelist, and this work is to be united with preaching. If it is omitted, the preaching will be, to a great extent, of failure. People have often said to me, well, evangelist, that's nice. You only have to work an hour a day. You get up in the pulpit at 7 o'clock, you preach for an hour and go home. I wish sometimes. Actually, I don't. I don't wish that because I love getting in those homes. I get out of bed in the morning, the first thing, and this is for my personality type. I get up about 7 o'clock because I didn't get in till 1. I'm not getting up at 5. I know that's more sanctimonious, but it's sacred to get up. Who said that? It's not right to get up. So when I joined this church, I noticed all the holiest people were getting up at 4:30 for prayer and stuff. I thought, oh, I'm going to do that too. And I got up at 4:30 thinking, I can change. I can't. I'm cranky till 10 o'clock no matter what time I start. So, but I get up at 7. The first thing I do is I preach that evening's sermon to a mirror. That's humiliating, but I do it. I preach that, even if I've preached it 1,000 times before, I preach it. I get in front of the mirror and I preach it. I'm watching my facial expressions, and I have a real gift for contorting my face into ugly configurations. And you got to work on that because visuals sell everything to the audience. You can say Jesus loves you, but if your face looks like you're in the fires of hell at the moment, they're not going to believe it. I watch my face. I preach it to a mirror. Actually, it's the last thing I do at night. Before I go to bed at midnight, I preach tomorrow night's sermon because I don't know how you are. I can only load one tape at a time, and when I've preached, I got to unload last night's sermon and load the next one. So I'll preach it just before bed because a college professor once told me, anything you want to remember the rest of your life, read it out loud before you go to bed, and you'll have it. You'll have 80% of it forever. So I preach it out loud, and then in the morning I get up, I run through it one more time, I make local adjustments for the audience that I'm getting to know, and then we hit the road. 8 o'clock, I'm already visiting homes. There are people ready at 8 o'clock, and we go from 8 till about 5, 5:30, 6 o'clock. Then I have a little ritual. I go home. I have a 10-minute bath. I don't know why, but I get in the bath. I think about the sermon, if I have time, and then I run over the hall, and I meet with people ahead of the meeting. Then you preach, and then you meet with people after the meeting, the ones that you couldn't find at home, and so on. Then I go back and I preach the next night's sermon. But the bulk of the work is in the homes. If we were doing the homes right, we wouldn't even have to have the evening meeting. Except that you would have never gotten me to a small group study. You had to have a public meeting to reach me. I would have never come to your touchy-feely, small group, everybody share their feelings meeting. I needed a public meeting where I could slip in. Most men do, by the way, need a public meeting where they can slip into the back of the room and leave if they don't like it. Because we like to be in control. That's why men always have the remote control. We just have to be in control. We have to be driving what happens in the front of the room. Public meetings. In the home. The work we have is mostly in the home. If half the time, she says now, spent in preaching were given to house labor, favorable results would be seen. If we're not visiting, we're not winning people. I had a background in politics. Before I was a Christian, I was in politics. It's good training for church work. It is. Well, it is. I won't tell you what party I campaigned for, but I learned a lot from them. And one of the things they taught us in a boot camp, they used to run this boot camp for 17 and 18-year-olds who wanted to learn how to run a political campaign, and then they'd let us run them. It was remarkable. They were tapping into the starry-eyed idealism of youth is what they were doing. Too often we patronize young people when if we were to give them real responsibilities, they'd knock our socks off with how well they do. They were letting us run campaigns at 17 and 18 years old for United States congressmen and senators. It was unbelievable. And one thing they told us is many of you in the opening day of class have the Sir Galahad syndrome, and you need to get rid of that today. They'd say, well, what's the Sir Galahad syndrome? They said, because you have an ideology and you believe it to be true, you know that you are true and right and noble. You are a knight of the round table and you are just and true, so you're always going to win. That's the Sir Galahad syndrome. You need to get rid of that yesterday. You will not win just because you're right. Now, I've discovered that's true about church work. Many of our members believe that because we are the remnant church and we have the truth and we are just and true and right and knights of the round table, that really all we have to do is open the church doors and wait for everybody to show up. That's the Sir Galahad syndrome, and we need to drop it. Our people need to be in the community. They need to meet people. You can't win people you don't know. I've never baptized somebody I don't know. We've got to drop it and get into the community. So, we visit. And in an evangelistic meeting, visitation, good visitation is planned, it is organized, and it is faithfully executed, no matter how you feel. It's planned, organized, and faithfully executed. Right? First thing I do, I faithfully track my visitors. People say, really? but it seems so you're imposing on people if you make them register for your meetings. I know it feels that way sometimes, but you don't have to be pushy. It's as simple as having somebody at the door welcoming people saying, oh, I'm so glad you've come for tonight's meeting or tonight's seminar. Please, registration's right over here. And that's it. If they don't want to, you don't force them. I'd rather have them come in and sit down and listen, but at least I invite them to register, because how in the world am I going to get to their home if I don't know who they are? I had somebody once say, oh, we don't ever want to hold evangelistic meetings again because it doesn't work and attendance dropped off so quickly. I said, oh, I feel bad about that. I said, maybe we could figure that out together where it went wrong. Can we sit down together and look at your attendance records? He said, well, we didn't take attendance records. I said, didn't you register anybody? No, we didn't register anybody. That's imposing on them. I said, so how do you know that your audience was dropping off? He said, well, we just kind of know who's here. Well, it was a church of 2,000 people. They were holding it in the church. I said, how in the world do you know who's here and who's not among your guests? We need to register people. You got to track them. You can't go visit people if you don't know they exist. You might figure out 5 or 6 in the lobby, but do register. Don't push, but do ask. I have workers' meetings twice a week. Any night, I usually preach 5 nights a week, sometimes 4. But one of the things I do is on off nights, the first time we meet, I promise a whole day of activity. I say, you know what, we're all going to get together with the visitation team on Monday. We don't have a Monday night meeting, so we're going to get together, say at 8 or 9 in the morning, whenever it is, let them sleep a little bit, maybe 10 o'clock. But I have an activity plan, and the activity is this. I said, dress comfortably, because we're not going anywhere that first time. We're going to spend the whole day together. Really, Sean? I said, yes, dress comfortably. We'll bring lunch, you order some pizzas or some burritos or something. And what we do is we read every name of every person who has come to the meetings over the weekend out loud. It's very tempting. I mean, sometimes if there's 2,500 people that show up, it takes all day to read those names out loud, but we do it anyway. People say, why don't you just divide it up by zip code and send people to a zip code and distribute the names? I won't do it that way, and there's a number of reasons. Number one, those are human beings, and God knows their names, and we owe it to God to learn their names, and I'm going to read them out loud. God honored us with those people, and we're going to read their names out loud. Number two, I want to know if anyone in the room knows those names. I read them, every one of them out loud. Bill Smith. Anybody know Bill Smith? Yeah, Bill Smith. Hey, that's a cousin of one of my church members. Bang, that's the pastor who's going there that day. We read them all out loud. I want to know who they are. Does anybody know them? Nobody knows them? Then where do they live? Whose church are they closest to? But then I don't distribute them by accident. I don't shuffle it like a deck of cards and hand out the names. I ask the team to ask for them. Let's break up into teams 2 by 2, team 1, 2, 3, and 4, and I make them ask, because I don't want to give names to people who have no intention of going and visiting them. I have them ask for them. And if they won't take them, I'll take them. I'll take them all if nobody wants them. They want them. I have them ask for it. It might take all day. The second time we meet, say it's on Thursday, we'll do it once more, read through it. And after that, you just read the new people's names, which is a much shorter task. You can do it in a few minutes, but I read them all out loud. The next time we meet, I might pull out the list. I say, hey, who went to see Bill Smith? Now, if you have a team member that didn't go visiting, at that moment, they'll kind of be scrambling. Ooh, I didn't realize that we'd be held accountable. I actually read the name aloud. Hey, who went to go see Bill Smith? Oh, you haven't been there yet? Hey, when do you think you could get there today? Oh, you can't go. Hey, does somebody else want Bill Smith's name? I never drop a single name because it always bothers me. What if somebody had dropped my name? That thought bothers me to this day. What if somebody had dropped my name and never came around? I needed final convincing to join the Seventh-day Adventist Church, and if they'd dropped my name, I might still be waiting on the outside. Names are human beings. So we read them all out loud, and then we organize to visit. All right? I evaluate every name to the very best of my ability. We might not know them, and then we have to go to the house to evaluate them. I assign every single name to a team. I have people ask for them, and then we review it every meeting. I use a reporting system of some kind and review it. I still am pretty old-fashioned about visiting, and we'll get into the different kinds of visits in our next segment. But I pull out a map. I use Google Maps now because you can drop little pins and keep notes right on Google Maps, and it'll work on your tablet and on your phone and everywhere. And if I have, say, 15 or 20 names that I want to go see today, I know that's only what? That's only 8 dots. People say, do you ask for appointments? In this day and age, you need to ask for an appointment. Well, as a general rule, I don't. Sometimes you have to. You have to find them in the hall and ask for a time to see people. But as a general rule, I don't ask, because if somebody says, no, I don't want to visit, then it's over. I can't go by their house. And I'll show you how I get away with murder at the door coming uninvited in the next segment. But I'll generally get in my car and I'll drive around the circle. Generally, the dots kind of form a circle. I can kind of go around and around that circle, and I visit and I visit and I visit. If they're not home, I go around the circle once more, and eventually I get them all at home. And if not, well, I come back tomorrow. But I hound them like the, what's the, I don't want to say the hounds of hell. That's terrible, but heavens, yeah, that's it. Thank you, Jack. You just saved me from saying something wrong. I go around and I get to every one of those homes. And the first time I go to the house, I'm just trying to figure out who they are. And it's the most non-threatening visit they're ever going to get in their life. Grand total, 45 seconds. My first visit. I bang on the door. Right? I'm just trying to evaluate it. I don't ever put that visit off too long. It's very tempting to say, oh, they need to come a whole bunch more times. But after 4 or 5 meetings, you can go to that house and show yourself. I don't put it off too long. I keep that first visit as brief and non-threatening as possible. I make myself as non-threatening as possible. And I remember the 3 things they want to know. Here's how it goes. I knock on the door. And because I'm not the world's biggest guy, but I'm 6 foot tall and 195 pounds. I do not fill their door frame if I can help it, because that's the wrong body language. I knock on the door and I step away from the door. I take 3 or 4 steps back. If I can go down the steps, I do. Down 2 or 3 steps so that hopefully when they open the door, I'm shorter than them. And then I turn away from their house, not quite with my back to them, but at least sideways. And I'm staring usually at their front lawn when they answer the door. And it's almost like I forgot why I was there when they opened the door. I forgot that I'm even there. They open the door and I turn and say, oh, hi. And usually I'll have something in my hand that identifies me with whatever meeting or Bible study they've been coming to. A handbill, a brochure, a poster, whatever it is that brands me, because it's amazing how much different you look at somebody's door than you do on a platform. Right? So I brand myself. And I turn and say, oh, you are home. Hey, listen. And I tell them the 3 things they want to know. You know what they want to know, right, at the door. They want to know, who are you, what do you want, and how long until you go away? That's what they want to know. So I tell them in the first sentence, oh, hey, I'm Sean. I'm at those meetings that you've been coming to, and I can't stay at all or come in. I've been in the neighborhood thanking people for coming in person. It just didn't seem good enough from the front. Anyway, that's just it. Thank you. And I guess I got to go. I literally that fast. I just blurt it out of my mouth and I start to walk away. And at first they're shocked, like, what? And then they're relieved. He's not staying. He's not going to come in. He's not going to try anything. It was just a thank you. And I'm walking away. That's the whole first visit. That's pretty easy, right? Except that I pull a Columbo before I get down to the sidewalk. I turn around and say, oh, just one more thing. Yeah. How did you find out about these meetings? Because we spend a lot of money on advertising, and I'm always curious how people found out. Still non-threatening, right? Oh, well, no, I got a cousin in your church that invited me over. Okay, that's great to know. I saw it on TV. I listened to the voice of prophecy on whatever it is. That's valuable information. If you know how they came to the meetings, that's the first step towards figuring out what God's doing in their life. What was the point of access? And that's it. After they answer that question, I turn to leave again and I say one last thing. I say, well, I hope that it's a real blessing to you, and I pause just long enough that it's evident that I'm after some kind of a response. If they say, I'm just trying to gauge their interest level. If they say, oh yeah, it's great. I say, great. Tonight we're going to talk about Armageddon. I'll see you there at 7 o'clock, and I walk away. Non-threatening. Do you know why that's so great? Is the next time I show up, they're already breathing easy. They know I'm not going to do anything or ask much from them. They're actually wondering to see how weird I'm going to be the next time I come by their house. You get away with murder if you smile. You can stick a knife right into somebody's ribs if you're smiling while you do it. That's it. First visit. This afternoon, we'll talk about what happens the next time you get to the house.